Hello, learner. Welcome to Mr. Quickest Teaches. In this lesson, I'll be analyzing the short story Yiyun Lee's 1,000 Years of Good Prayers. I'll read portions of the story and explain the different figurative devices, stylistic devices, the point of view, the tone, other important aspects of the short story. Essentially, I'll try to simplify the story so if you're writing it at the GCSE, if in the UK or the IGCSE as an international student, or any other exam for that matter, where you're required to speak about the short story 1,000 Years of Good Prayers, you'll be able to do an excellent job. Let's dive in. Now, let me begin by speaking about the short story writer Yiyun Lee. Yiyun Lee is actually a Chinese writer who works as a professor in the United States of America. She has received a litany of literary awards for her work. Now, in this short story, 1,000 Years of Good Prayers, Lee tells the story of an elderly Chinese man, Mr. Chi, who is visiting his recently divorced daughter in America. So the interaction between the pair, there's a father-daughter pair, exposes a father's desperation to bond with his daughter and a daughter's pain at her father's lies and non-communication in her formative years. So when you read the short story, you realize that Mr. Chi actually tricked his way to America because he found out that his daughter is divorced, and then he has like this idea of the stigma of divorce. I won't talk about that as part of the themes, but he has like this idea of the stigma of divorce, and he comes thinking that his daughter is some heartbroken, rejected. Actually, he thinks of her as an abandoned woman. But she, on the other hand, remembers that while she was growing up, while he worked in communist China, he wasn't very communicative. And so that bond between them was never really formed. But he thinks that because they speak the same language, Chinese or Mandarin, they should be able to communicate quite freely. But that's not what we see in the short story. And Lee does an excellent job because she makes the reader take a second look at the nature of a relationship between a father and a daughter, and also know that the way you deal with your children, especially in their formative years, is something that they never forget. So now we see that with Mr. Chi, like I mentioned, is visiting America. The pair that's Mr. Chi and his daughter, she's never named actually in the short story. They have multiple verbal face-offs about divorce, about their family's lies and secrets. The story also highlights the theme of friendship, using the unlikely one between the Chinese-speaking Mr. Chi and the Persian-speaking Madame from Iran. So that essentially is a synopsis of the short story. Now, let me begin by reading the first paragraph. So, observe that the word rocket scientist is repeated twice in the introduction. And this is really important because Mr. Chi wants to sort of exalt his position as someone who is a rocket scientist is achievement, what was able to achieve both academically and professionally. So it says, a rocket scientist, Mr. Shi tells people when they ask him about his profession in China. Retired, he then adds, out of modesty, when people marvel. Mr. Chi learned the phrase from a woman during a layoff in Detroit, when he tried to explain to her his work, drawing pictures when his English failed him. Now, a rocket scientist, he exclaimed, laughing out loud. Later, we are going to see that he, tries to use his hand to provide visual imagery of the kind of what he means by a rocket scientist. Now, in the second paragraph of the short story, the setting is revealed. So we were told that the story is set in America, and America is described as a place that is already friendly, and where in just 5 days, Mr. Chi has already made a friend and a number of close acquaintances. A place where mothers with babies in strollers wave at him, and an old couple, the husband in suit and the wife in skirts, a hand on his arm, stop to greet him, the wife smiling. Now, the description of America this way shows it as a very idyllic place, a place where someone can make friends quite quickly. And Mr. Chi actually does. He makes friends with Madame, and we see the couple that I mentioned there, and also his exchange that he has in the first paragraph of the story with the woman he met at a layoff in Detroit. So he sees America as a place that is idyllic. Later on, we are going to see the economic benefits of America. So Madame says, for example, that her sons are making good money. Mr. Chi is also happy that his daughter is also making good money as well. Now, in the introductory portions, the first 3 paragraphs, Mr. Chi is the first character that is introduced. So the reader infers that he's 75 years old. And his friends, right? His friends with a 77-year-old woman of Iranian descent. The elderly pair both speak little English. That's what Lee tells the reader. So the narrative voice tells the reader that both of them speak very little English, but they're able to communicate and form a friendship. Now, Madame, on the other hand, who is the second character, she's 77, right? And she's of Iranian descent. A friend of Mr. Chi's. She lives in a retirement home, but Mr. Chi lives with his daughter. So we see that the theme of friendship is expressly shown in the opening portions of the short story. And we see that in the quote, despite the fact that they both spoke little English, they have no problem understanding each other. And in no time, they become friends. So this shows that friendship and understanding can bridge cultural and language divides. So Mr. Chi and Madame both have like cultural, and divide and then language divide, but they're able to sort of bridge it by, friendship. Now, we also see the use of repetition as well in the opening portions of the short story. Apart from America that is repeated, we see that rocket scientist is actually repeated twice in the introductory paragraph. And this is really, really important, right? It's important because it shows that Mr. Chi wants to emphasize his level of education and his professional status as a way to gain respect, like people's respect, for them to deal with him or treat him with respect as somebody who was able to achieve, this is quite a high professional achievement like this, like being a rocket scientist. Now, another thing that we also see that Lee uses as part of the stylistic devices is that she uses dialogue. Later on, we're going to see the use of flashback, but here, she uses dialogue. So here, we see the exchange between Madame and Mr. Chi. So Madame says, for example, America, good country. She says often, sons make rich money. So America, good country, sons make rich money. It's put in quotes to indicate to the readers that this is Madame's words, And then we also see that Mr. Chi also says, my daughter, she makes lots of money too. And then Madame says, I love America, good country for everybody. And Mr. Chi says, yes. A rocket scientist, I am in China, but very poor. Rocket scientist, Mr. Chi says his hand making a peak. So that's what I was talking about the use of visual imagery to indicate that he was once a rocket scientist. And then Madame says, I love China. China, a good country, very old, the woman says. And then Mr. Chi says, America is a young country, like young people. America, a happy country, again, Madame says. So young people are more happy than old people, Mr. Chi says. And then realizes it's too abrupt a conclusion. He himself feels happier at this moment than he remembers he ever did in his life. The woman in front of him, who loves everything, with or without a good reason, seems happy too. So now, let me explain some of the points that are made on as part of the side note or the comments. I mentioned that Lee uses dialogue, and the usefulness of the dialogue is important because the reader can hear directly from Mr. Chi and Madame. So, and this is important because their conversation, that Mr. Chi and Madame's conversation, is shown or is indicated with direct speech. So this is seen in the use of speech marks, which allows the reader to hear verbatim the simplicity of their words. Their words are very simple. America, good country. So that's not high-end English. These are people who have, issues with English. So English is not their first language, as it were. So from there we see the simplicity of their words, their poor grammar, and their word omission. So there are portions where they omit words. So we see that Madame says, America, good country, sons make rich money. I love America, good country for everybody. To which Mr. Chi responds, my daughter, she makes lots of money too. A rocket scientist, I am in China, but very poor. So the lack of fluency in the pair's speech, that's Mr. Chi and Madame's, reveals that English is not their first language. Also, Mr. Chi and Madame's words show that they are proud of their children's financial success and are living their best life. So Mr. Chi tells, for example, that he thought about it and said, young people, have like the best life. But when he thought about it more deeply, he realized that he's happier now, and Madame seems to be very happy than he's ever been in entire life. So that kind of idea or that argument was tossed away from his mind, Now, Again, we also see the use of repetition here as well. So Mr. Chi twice repeats yes to emphasize that he doubly agrees with Madam that America is a good country for everyone. Then he again repeats, we see that he again repeats rocket scientist twice in this paragraph. So the paragraph where it says yes, he repeats rocket scientist twice to emphasize his high status, or the status that he was able to achieve in his professional life, and to also reiterate his professional achievement. So these are very, very important parts or important aspects of the short story. So we see that Mr. Chi appears to be very, very happy, and he's proud of what he was able to achieve, in his life. Then we also see the use of visual imagery as well. The quote, Mr. Chi says his hand making a peak, provides visual imagery of Mr. Chi using his hand to mimic a rocket jetting into space. So that's the visual imagery that I talked about. Then we also see the use of multiple personifications as well. Now observe that as Mr. Chi and Madam speak, they do not speak, they speak with rich words. The richness of their words is seen in the figurative language with which they express themselves. And you know that Chinese and Persian are languages that are, that are fused with very rich words and proverbs and those kind of, expressions. So Madam's word, China, a good country, very old, personifies China and presents it as wizened and gray with age. It can also be inferred that it is harder for a person to leave their mark on it, that's on China, right? It's harder for somebody to do that than for a person to leave their mark on a younger country like America. So America is like a country where people can easily leave their mark, unlike China that has, a rich, extensively older civilization, right? Has multiple dynasties, have like people of repute infused into its culture and history. But America is like a country that is a bit more bubbly, so it's a happy country. It's young compared to China. Even though America is 300 plus odd years, China is like thousands of 2,000 plus years in terms of the civilization. So it's an older country. So that's like the idea that Madam is trying to present here, with a personification of it as very old. Then we also see the use of simile as well. The words America is a young country like young people portrays America as a lively place. Remember, this is Madam speaking here, as a lively place that does not have a complicated history like China. So people can easily leave their mark. Then we also see the use of two or twin personifications as well in this portion, both from Madam and also from Mr. Chi. Now, one of the funny things I found in the story, especially in this portion, even though it gets a bit serious as it gets towards the end, is that Mr. Chi never asks Madam her name. So he refers to her as Madam. Now, let's go back to the personification. So the expression, America is a young country, personifies it and suggests that it is relatively young when compared to China and Persia. Now, the use of happy country, a third personification to describe it, that's America, also suggests that people enjoy living in America. So America is an enjoyable place. And remember, Mr. Chi said that even though he had been a rocket scientist in China, he didn't earn enough or a lot of money. That has to be tied, even though it's not something that is expressly revealed in the short story. Towards the end, we see the infusion of ideas about communism and the kind of country that China was before, it embraced capitalism, and it's like the modern and the rich country that it is today. In fact, the second, from some sources, the second largest economy in the world. So we see that the happy country, a third personification to describe it, also suggests that people enjoy living in America. Mr. Chi uses here Madam's happiness as examples of how being in America makes people happy. Then, from this portion of the last paragraph, we see that the language is again revealed. The nature of the language between the pair is again revealed by Lee. So she says that sometimes they run out of English. That's Madam and Mr. Chi. They run out of English. They're unable to speak English. But then Madam switches to Persian. So she begins to speak a native Persian, mixed with a few English words. Mr. Chi finds it hard to speak Chinese with her. If she carries the conversation No, it is she who carries the conversation alone then for 10 or 20 minutes. He nods and smiles effusively. He does not understand much of what she's saying, but he feels her joy. He feels her joy in talking to her. The same joy she feels listening to him. So we see the friendship and the shared joy and happiness that they have by just speaking, even though it appears that they're speaking across airs and do not understand each other. Now, the next thing that we see is that we are told, or a description of Madame is given to the reader. So Mr. Chi starts to look forward to the mornings when he sits in the park and waits for Madame. So this tells us that Mr. Chi looks, he longs to have like this morning ritual of meeting Madame in the park. It's something that he looks forward to. Then we are told that Madame is what he uses to address her, as he never asks her name. So that's the point I made earlier, that he never asks her a name. Then we are told about visual imagery is present of what Madame is wearing, or her attire, what she's wearing. And she comes across as a very elderly, but colorful, fashionable woman. So we're told that Madame wears colors that he does not imagine a woman her age or where she came from would wear. You see, so Mr. Chi has like this idea of what Madame should be wearing, but he's shocked the kind of clothes that she's wearing. She's presented as someone that's rather colorful, and this is an important point because we're going to see that Mr. Chi wants his daughter to meet Madame so that Madame's fashion sense and happiness for life will rub off his daughter. And that is something that he doesn't understand. Why does a young daughter who has a life, in her 30s, why does she have like such pessimistic opinions of the world? And Madame that is older, 77-year-old, why does she have like such happiness and joy and wear such, vibrant colors? So Madame wears colors that he does not imagine a woman her age or where she came from would wear. Red and orange and purple and yellow. She has a pair of metal barrettes, a white elephant, and a blue and green peacock. Then, now let's look at the tone, Lee's tone around this point. Now, the writer Yiyun Lee agrees with Madame on America. And I think by extension, she also agrees with Mr. Chi on America. Remember, the setting of this story is really important because it is a setting that allows Mr. Chi's daughter to argue that being divorced doesn't carry the stigma that Mr. Chi imagines that he carries, especially, because he's traditionally Chinese or a Chinese father. She adds indeed to Madame's words. So she's saying, America is indeed a good country. So Lee appears to agree with both elderly characters that America is a good country. Her affirmation reveals her positive attitude towards America, especially because of the financial possibilities and freedoms that people enjoy. So America is presented as a country that has like boundless financial possibilities tied to it, and a place where people actually enjoy freedom. Now, Madame is also shown to be a colorful person. I've made that point already, right? That likes expressing a personality with colorful attires. So the quote, red and orange and purple and yellow, a white elephant and blue and green peacock, shows this. Mr. Chi considers her style endearing and unique because of her age. Now, one of the things that we see as well, even though Mr. Chi is looking at Madame, he begins to remember his daughter. Uses flashback to remember his daughter when she was younger. In fact, when she was a small child. So, using flashback, Lee reveals aspects of Mr. Chi's relationship with his daughter when she was younger. Remember, he's looking at Madame in a colorful attire, and then suddenly he begins to remember his daughter when she was younger. She tells Lee tells that seeing Madame's metal barrettes made him remember his daughter as a small child. Now, there's a sense that Mr. Chi's love for his daughter makes him see her in everything. So Mr. Chi appears to see his daughter in everything. Then we see the use of visual imagery as well, as he describes what what his daughter would have looked like when she was younger. So the words, the clasps on her thin hair, a wobbly way, with a plastic butterfly hanging loose on her forehead, provides visual imagery of how the hairpin would insecurely hang on Mr. Chi's daughter's head. Then the quote, but he is sure even before he starts that his English would fail him. This is a point that is reiterated multiple times to show that these characters, Madame, Mr. Chi, are not native English speakers. So by sure, even before it starts, that his English would fail him reveals Mr. Chi's lack of English fluency. However, the submission, it is never his habit to talk about the past, is shocking because Mr. Chi always mentions his previous role as a rocket scientist. So it appears that Mr. Chi loves to talk about everything about his past. Loves to talk about his professional achievement, but does not love to talk about the unpleasant portions of his past. Hello, learner. I hope you've enjoyed the lesson so far. This is a sample analysis of this short story. To purchase the full analysis of this short story or the entire 10 short stories in your collection, visit mrquickesteaching.com. There you have access to the passage-based questions and also general questions and elements of literature in each of the short stories. See the purchase links in the description below. See you in class.